All right, welcome to episode 68 of the 2 Minute Warning. Back to college football today. Looking at Notre Dame, currently a number 2 ranked team coming off a big win over Clemson. Will we see this team in the college football playoff? And if we do, what do they need to do to get there?
You know, there's really a lot of speculation, just like every other team. It's pretty early. We don't know how the regular season goes. We're just kind of assuming, you know, the big top dog teams will win out in the regular season, such as Clemson, Alabama, UF, Ohio State, and including Notre Dame. But really, it's going to come down to, for Notre Dame, what they do in the ACC. If they can beat Clemson, I think they're locked in because Clemson will fall out. There's
Absolutely,
no way they
if they win out,
2
they're in.
losses. Yeah. But if they don't, things get really interesting because they need to see how the SEC game goes with the ACC Championship, which we're assuming will be the Gators versus Alabama. If Alabama loses, I think they'll stay in it, and the Gators will also be then in the top 4, and then Clemson just beat Notre Dame, so they'll be ahead of them, and then you still got Ohio State and Notre Dame fighting for that final slot pretty much. I really think if Ohio State wins out, they'll beat Notre Dame for the final slot, and I don't think they make it just because I don't see Clemson losing in the ACC now that they have Trevor Lawrence, and I do think Kyle Trask has a great chance of beating Alabama in the SEC.
Yeah, the thing that Notre Dame has going for them right now is they can afford
one loss.
They could, well, yes, that's for sure, but they can afford 1 loss in the ACC Championship if it's a relatively close game. They can't come out and lose to Clemson by 14 points. Then they're going to be bumped most likely because they'll drop from 2 to probably 5 or 6 with that loss there. But if they can manage to either, of course, beat Clemson in the ACC Championship or lose by a score, they can probably, this is not necessarily for sure, that's their chance to stay at number 4. So likely Notre Dame needs to win out. They can't really afford a loss at any game, but possibly even if they lose the ACC Championship, they might be able to hang around.
Depending on
likely,
the SEC.
depending on, there's a lot. That's the one thing, of course. If they lose that game, they're definitely likely not going to be there, but they can still find a way in.
I was going to mention, if, say, Florida wins and so does Clemson, do you think Notre Dame makes it above Alabama? Because they already proven that they can beat Clemson, so there's a chance that they make it above Alabama. Alabama would be losing to a number 6 seed, while Notre Dame's losing to a number 4 seed. So there's a chance that Alabama gets knocked down.
The only way, in my opinion, that happens if Alabama loses by 30 and
Alabama's hanging around.
Notre Dame loses by an extra point. That's the only way, in my opinion, that happens. And out of all those speculation, we still haven't even mentioned Texas A&M, which is currently the 5th seed. There's a lot of speculation right now. I'm going to have to say no, they do not make it in.
Yeah, I mean, I think Notre Dame, what they did with that win was basically they made the field a lot more crowded. That game was huge for them, and now they're in they're in a good spot, being that they've already beat Clemson. So they just, they win all the way. They're obviously in. If they lose to Clemson, they still have a chance to be in, depending on how other teams do. But it just makes it a lot harder. And now there's so many more teams and scenarios in the mix. You could end up having, a situation where you could very easily have 2 ACC teams in the playoff, which I think is a huge possibility.
Yeah.
So I think Ian Book needs to continue to play well. That offensive line needs to continue to carry for him. I think his scrambling ability and his decision making against Clemson was really big against that top defense. So I think right now Notre Dame really controls their own destiny. I still think that Clemson is going to beat them in the ACC Championship in that rematch. But we'll see. That I still think there's a very good possibility that Notre Dame's able to sneak in, even if they're a 1-loss team.
Yeah, we saw Notre Dame play Clemson really well this past week. Got a double overtime win. Of course, like you said, Ian Book played fantastic. Reminded me of how Johnny Manziel played football in college. Over 350 yards. Only 1 touchdown through the air, but he didn't take a sack all game, which credit goes to the offensive line and, of course, his scrambling ability. So Ian Book led that team really, really well. 2-minute drill at the end of the game to tie it, then evidently go to overtime and win the game. Kyron Williams, 140 rush yards, 3 touchdowns, so they got a great running game, which all starts again with that O-line. Did a great job protecting them, so there's high-powered offense. Their defense didn't necessarily hold up Clemson. I mean, there was just back and forth scoring. Clemson was down by 18 at one point and managed to come back.
They did force 2 turnovers and limit the running game, so I would say their defense did pretty solid.
Arguably, Clemson gave them those 2 turnovers, so that's questionable. But anyway, Notre Dame looks great offensively and defensively. Obviously, to win a game against Clemson, your defense had to play well. So I think ultimately this team probably doesn't find their way in the playoff just because I think Clemson's going to come out with fire and beat them by 14 points in the ACC Championship, which would knock them out. But I think this is a great team either way.
I was going to mention, we might be overlooking the rest of the season. They do have I was just reading an article. They have the number 20th ranked schedule remaining. So
as far as strength
of schedule. Boston College, we saw them put up a real good fight against Clemson just the other week. So there's a chance that they come out wanting to beat a top 4 team. There's a chance they drop a game to them. And North Carolina was recently ranked in the top 15, I believe, and Wake Forest is 4-2, I believe. So they do have some solid opponents to go against. But I think right now it's it could go either way for them. I haven't made up my mind yet because there's a very real possibility that Alabama beats Florida, but we're all Florida hopeful, so we hope they make it, but there's a very real chance they do make it.
I just think Notre Dame looked too sharp against Clemson for me to say that they're going to drop.
Exactly, it's hard to say that.
Although they do need to continue to play at a very high level if they want to have a chance to beat teams like Boston College, North Carolina, Wake Forest for their remaining schedules. So we'll see how they are able to fare against those teams.
Like Carson said in another video, if I think Notre Dame can afford a 1 loss versus Clemson if the Gators lose and Texas A&M drops a regular season game versus like Ole Miss or something like that, then I do think they're still locked in for the top 4 seeds. But outside of that, you need the Gators to lose and you need Ole Miss to drop a game to a game they're favored in. So it's just really unlikely. But Texas A&M. But it is really unlikely, and I don't think it will happen. But to say it's impossible, no, it's not.
Yep, we'll wait and see.
2 minutes.
Good morning.
Who did I